So today I'm sharing what I've been reading this week. Hey there, it's Mitzi. Welcome to my channel. So I wanted to talk about the books I've been reading and just things going on here. It's been very exciting and busy at my house. So if you follow my channel, you know that last weekend we celebrated my son's wedding. He was married last Saturday and it was super busy and super emotional, all those things last week. And so I want to say before I talk about the books, thank you for all that sent me the prayers and comments and all the wonderful encouragement that you sent me last weekend when I told you that I was nervous about the wedding and all the things that we had to prepare for that. So thank you so much for your prayers and your comments, because they really did encourage me last weekend. So it was beautiful. I'll be sharing more about that in my July wrap up, because they're on their honeymoon this week and I'm going to talk to them about sharing pictures or anything. I don't want to share anything that they don't want me to on my channel. But I'm going to try my best to share a couple of pictures or maybe some video or something from the wedding last week. But just know it was wonderful. I really had a great time. And of course the bride was beautiful. The sanctuary and the wedding were beautiful. The reception was in this big barn and it was just beautiful. Everything was just wonderful and we had a wonderful weekend. But yes, I was totally exhausted afterwards, because it's emotional and all too. So it was a wonderful weekend, but wow, it was super busy. So I didn't read much, of course, because I had that going on over the weekend. Now I will say that the thing that really helped me a lot was in the evenings, when we would get home from so many things going on over the past week or so, reading really did help me unwind and decompress when I would get home in the evening. So I did enjoy that, but over the weekend, there just wasn't even time for that. But I did get back to my reading Sunday, and I've been reading all week, and I've read a lot of things. Considering I've read 4 books this week. Now, I didn't read all of them back to back. These were things I had already started and I finished up this week. So I wasn't like from, beginning to end reading these books. So anyway, these are the books that I read. It was not my best week of reading, probably because of all that was going on this week. But these books were they were okay books, and so I want to talk about those now. So the first one I read was Daphne du Maurier's Mary Ann. Daphne du Maurier wrote a lot of very popular books like Rebecca, My Cousin Rachel, Jamaica Inn. There's lots of books that she wrote, including a lot of great short stories. And I love Daphne du Maurier's writing. I'm trying to read everything she's written. Some I have enjoyed, some not so much, but I do love the way she tells a story, because I do love Gothic suspense, and I think she is the queen of Gothic suspense. And I love Rebecca, My Cousin Rachel, those kind of books. So I am trying to read through her books, and this is one that I have had for a long time and just hadn't picked up, and I decided I would go ahead and read this one. This one is based on her great-great-grandmother and this scandalous affair that her great-great-grandmother Mary Ann had with the Duke of York. And it is a page turner for sure. But I will say it was not my favorite. I think because it was based on a true story, and it's a novel. She doesn't say it's a biography, but it is based on that story. So most of it is what she knows about the court case and what was going on during this time with this scandal. But I guess I'm just not into scandals, you know what I mean? And so I will say this about Daphne du Maurier. She does not sugarcoat her great-great-grandmother and make her come out to be, the perfect person. By all means, she tells it like it is. And so I do respect her for doing that. But because of that, I really didn't like Mary Ann at all. And I'll say, as I started reading this, I thought I was reading Gone with the Wind. It was like Scarlett O'Hara and Rhett Butler. That's how this relationship went. It was a train wreck. People that did not need to be together. That was just, causing a lot of trouble. and destruction along the way in everyone else's lives too. So that was hard to read. But I will say that Daphne du Maurier can tell a great story. She is definitely a storyteller, and it was a page turner. It was like, what in the world? But it was one of those stories where, you know, like a train wreck, where you don't need to be watching it, but you can't look away kind of thing. That's how I felt when I was reading it. The beginning of the story tells the background of Mary Ann and how she was raised, and how she was a super smart, determined girl. And she really was a courageous girl. It really does show her strengths as a character at the beginning of the story. But she makes some really bad choices as a young girl. And those choices lead her down this road. And there are places where in her life where she could have made a different choice, but she kept going down the wrong path, in my opinion. The second half of the story is more the court case of what happened, and it felt more like a newspaper article to me in that part of it. And I think she was trying to just keep to the facts maybe in that part. I'm sure this was not the easiest book for her to write, considering it was about her great-grandmother, a great-great-grandmother. I did find it interesting, but again, it's not my favorite book by Daphne du Maurier. And if you have never read Daphne du Maurier, this is not like her normal book. So I wouldn't recommend it as a first read for Daphne du Maurier, but I did read that one. And then I picked up Death Comes to Pemberley by P.D. James. This was to fulfill a prompt for Jane Austen July. I had several books I wanted to read to celebrate Jane Austen during the month of July, and so this one I've had on my shelf for quite some time. I also use this for the summer book bingo because one of the prompts is a second chance author, and I read a book by P.D. James a while ago and just didn't like it. I didn't even finish it. So I thought that would be, this would be a good one for that prompt to give her a second chance. So I read it for that as well as for Jane Austen July. And there is a movie adaptation, so I'm hoping that maybe this weekend I can watch the movie adaptation too. This was an okay read. I did enjoy the premise of the story. It is set right after, well, I think a few years after Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy are married, and they are settled in at Pemberley, and it's a murder takes place, and there is, you know, all the characters from Pride and Prejudice show up in this story. And of course, Mr. Wickham is at the center of the whole case with the murder. So that made it interesting and fun. The problem I had was she went back and just overly shared details from Pride and Prejudice. If you are reading this book, I would assume that you know the premise of Pride and Prejudice. Even if you haven't read it, I would assume that would be why you was interested in this. Now, I'm not saying that you'd have to be read it, you know, and I understand P.D. James saying, okay, I'm going to give you a little background so that you know a little bit about Pride and Prejudice, just in case you're one of the people who hadn't read it or whatever, if you just love P.D. James. So I understand why the beginning is, you know, like a background. And I'll say, The Other Bennet Sister, I've heard people complain that the book, The Other Bennet Sister, told too much of Pride and Prejudice. And it did tell a lot of Pride and Prejudice. The difference was that was telling from a different perspective, the story. So I liked the way that I think it's Janice Hadlow. I think that's who wrote that one. I like the way that she told the parts of Pride and Prejudice and, you know, wove that into the story, The Other Bennet Sister, because she was telling it from a totally different perspective. This one, on the other hand, was a lot of just summarizing the book of Pride and Prejudice. And I mean a lot of summarizing the book of Pride and Prejudice. It's like you're reading Pride and Prejudice, and then all of a sudden you start talking about this murder case now in this time. You know what I mean? So I didn't like that about it. And I felt like half of this book didn't need to be there because it was way too much. At the end, after they've solved the mystery of who had committed this murder and why, there's like 2 or 3 more chapters. And those chapters are Mr. Darcy apologizing to Elizabeth for his behavior in Pride and Prejudice. And I thought, okay, that's already been resolved because they got married. So they had already resolved those issues in Pride and Prejudice. So I almost felt like P.D. James was trying to sort of rewrite what she thought was missing from Pride and Prejudice and kind of answer some questions maybe she had, tie up some loose ends maybe. But the problem is she's not Jane Austen, and it felt like someone trying to impersonate Jane Austen, sadly. So I did not like the book for that. I mean, you know, I would think it was like a 3-star read. I was interested. I wanted to know what was going on with this murder case. The premise was very interesting, but there was some really boring parts in here because it was, okay, this is just you retelling Pride and Prejudice. So I'll just say I did read it. I'm interested to see if the movie adaptation is better. It could be that I enjoyed the movie better than the book. Maybe the movie, you know, emphasizes this mystery, this murder mystery, more than Pride and Prejudice. I hope so. And I'll find out this weekend because I'm going to try my best to watch that this weekend. But I did give P.D. James another chance. I will say I do love her short stories. So I might just stick to her short stories and read those because I have read a couple of collections of P.D. James, her short story collections, and really enjoyed those. Have you read a P.D. James? If you follow my channel and you know what kind of book I like, that you think I would actually enjoy, let me know that in the comments because I know she's written a ton and maybe I've just chosen the wrong ones. Either my son or my husband said, give her another chance, you know, because you've given her 2, maybe you need to give her 3 chances. So maybe I'll do that. Let me know in the comments if I should. And then I read Only the Beautiful by Susan Meissner. I read this one to fulfill the prompt on Summer Book Bingo for sunset colors on the cover. And isn't this a beautiful cover? I love the cover of this book. I pre-ordered this. I don't normally pre-order, but it was Susan Meissner, and I just want to read everything she writes because she is a beautiful writer, and I really love the way that she tells historical fiction. And these days I have trouble finding historical fiction that I enjoy that's written now, but I do love Susan Meissner. So I did pre-order this, and so I was definitely wanting to get to this one, and it did fulfill that prompt on the Summer Book Bingo. This one is about a girl named Rosie. I think it's 1938 when the story begins. It gives a little bit about her past. She's an orphan, and it tells that situation, which was difficult. But she ends up pregnant at like 17 years old, and she's put in this institution. So this book deals with eugenics, teen pregnancy. There is a rape in this book. There's another story. The second half of the story takes place during World War II in Europe, and it's about how the Nazis were experimenting on disabled people. It's just a hard book. It is filled with just some horrible things. I'll just say that. Now, the way Susan Meissner deals with it, she doesn't go into a lot of graphic detail, but still, it is hard to read no matter how you tell that story. That's going to be hard to read. And I will say, it was about page 100 is where there was a rape scene. It's a sex scene with a minor, and it was very uncomfortable for me to read. It's only, you know, a paragraph or so, but it was enough to just make me feel very uncomfortable. I'm not saying that she didn't handle it well. I don't know how I would write that scene, but it was uncomfortable. And it is the central theme of this whole story. So you have to have that, you know, something about that detail in the story, because then the girl, the young girl who becomes pregnant, she's dealing with shame and, you know, was it her fault, that kind of thing. So I see why she put it in there, but I was very uncomfortable reading it. So anyway, I'm just letting you know there are a lot of difficult things in this book. Susan Meissner tells a story beautifully, and she does here, and I was interested in the story, but I will say it just changed, because halfway through the beginning of the story, the first half is Rosie's story, this young teenage girl who's pregnant and is sent to this institution where they sterilize people that have any kind of disabilities. And then we have the second half with, it's like comparing it to the Nazis and eugenics there. So we have two different perspectives. Helen is an older woman in Europe. She is an American, but she's in Europe. And then she comes back to the States, and it is then intertwined with Rosie's story. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what happens. So when we came to Helen, I was all invested in what was happening in Rosie's life, and it just ended abruptly, and you don't hear anything about Rosie until the end of the story. And so I didn't like that, because I was reading it for Rosie's story, because that's where we started, and I was invested in Rosie, and then we didn't get Rosie's story. Now, I did read some comments when I went to put up my rating on Goodreads. I did read a few comments because I was interested in how other people took this too. A lot of people said that they enjoyed Helen's story better than Rosie's story. I enjoyed Rosie's story much more than I enjoyed Helen's. They thought that the beginning dragged, and I can see why they thought that, but I was so invested in Rosie that I was interested, and I found it to be quite a page turner, honestly. When it ended abruptly with Rosie, I felt the opposite. I wanted to know more about Rosie, and I didn't think that we needed to know so much about this Helen character. So anyway, that was my opinion. It was an okay read. I enjoyed it. I do think that Susan Meisner's, well, I don't want to say I enjoyed it because it was hard to read, but I do enjoy the way she tells a story, and she writes a story beautifully. All of her stories always end with hope and encouragement, even though she does deal with very difficult topics. And I will say this one to me was the most difficult of her books that I've read. I have read, I think this is my 5th book by her, I think, and all of them have been difficult topics. One was even just all about, I think it was the Spanish flu, and that was very difficult. But I found that this one made me just feel uncomfortable in parts. So that was even more difficult for me to read. But I did read that one, and that fulfilled a prompt on the summer book bingo. And then finally, I wanted to mention this little book, Evergreen. It's a picture book that just came out this year. I found it at my library in the new arrivals, and I had to share it because these pictures are precious. They are just the sweetest little things, and I thought that you might be interested. I don't know if it's going to show up because of my ring light, but you might be interested if you like little picture books. This one is about a little squirrel, and his mom sends him with soup for his, I think it's his grandmother or aunt or somebody, across the forest, and he has to be brave and go take the soup to his grandmother because she's not feeling well. And it is just the sweetest thing, and there is a little twist, a little surprise at the end with the grandmother too. So I thought it was precious. I did like the story as much as I liked the pictures, to be honest. I mean, it was a cute little story, but the pictures just made it precious because they're so cozy, and I love little animal woodland creatures and all of that. So if you are looking for a fun read, see if your library has Evergreen by Matthew Cordell. It says that Matthew Cordell has one, a Caldecott too. So check that out and see if your library has that one. So those are the books that I read this past week, that I finished up this past week. I'm still working on Summer Book Bingo. I am very close to finishing up a blackout on the Summer Book Bingo, so I'm excited for that because I still have the month of August for that. What have you been reading? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.